there are 40 major reasons or causes of failure. More than twice as many causes of failure as there are principles of success. There are 17 principles of success, some combination of which is responsible for all successful achievements, and more than 40 major causes of failure. And that is not all of them. These are just the major causes. Now, self-examination is one of the most profitable things that you can indulge in, and sometimes you don't want to do it, but it's a very necessary thing for us to know ourselves as we are, especially our weaknesses. In putting out a philosophy of success, it is necessary to tell you the things that you should do in order to succeed, and also the things you should not do. Grade yourself as I go along, as I make comment on each one of them. Grade yourself from 0 to 100, meaning if you're 100% free of any one of them, grade yourself 100%. If you're only 50% free, grade yourself 50%. And if you aren't free at all, grade yourself 0. And when you get through, add the total up and divide it by 40, and you'll get your general average then on the control of the things that cause men and women to fail. First of all, on the habit of drifting with circumstances without definite aims or plans. Now, if you don't follow that habit of drifting, if you make decisions quickly, if you lay out plans and follow those plans, if you know exactly where you're going and are on the way, you can grade yourself 100% on that one. But be careful before you put down the grading, because it's the rarest thing in the world that anybody would be able to grade himself 100% on that one. You really have to be organized, and you really have to be prepared if you're going to do that. Number 2, unfavorable physical hereditary foundation at birth. Well, I don't need to make any comment on that. As a matter of fact, that can be or could be a cause of failure. Also, it could be a cause of success. Some of the most successful people I have ever known were handicapped by bad afflictions at birth. Number 3, meddlesome curiosity in connection with other people's business and affairs. Meddlesome curiosity. Now, curiosity is a wonderful thing. If we weren't curious, we'd never learn anything. We'd never investigate. But notice the wording of that, meddlesome curiosity with other people's affairs, something that doesn't really concern you. Of course, none of you would be guilty of that, so you'll grade yourself 100% on that. Or will you? Now, remember, as you grade yourself, go back in your past experiences and determine to what extent you have control of these weaknesses. Number 4, lack of a definite major purpose as a lifetime goal. We've been talking about that one for a long time, about having it. Now we're putting down the lack of it. If you lack it, here's a mighty good place to rate yourself 0. 5, inadequate schooling. Well, one of the most astounding things that I have learned from life is to discover that there is very little relationship between schooling and success. Now, I hesitated there for purpose, not because I didn't have something else to say and couldn't remember my lines, but I wanted you to think about that one. Some of the most successful people I have ever known have been people with the least amount of formal education, formal schooling. A lot of people go through life failures, and they alibi themselves out of it, kid themselves into believing that they're failures because they don't have a college education. If you come out of college with the feeling that you should be paid for what you know instead of what you do, then that college education hasn't done you much good until you meet that old man Destiny that's standing just around the corner where you're going to pass with a stuffed club, and it's not stuffed with cotton. You'll find out sooner or later that you're not going to be paid for what you know. You're going to be paid for what you do with what you know, or what you can get other people to do. Number 6, lack of self-discipline, generally manifesting itself by excesses in eating, drinking, and indifference toward opportunities for self-advancement and improvement. Lack of self-discipline. I hope you can grade yourselves very high on that one. Number 7, lack of ambition to aim above mediocrity. There's a humdinger. Just how much ambition do you have? Anyway, where are you going in life? What do you want out of life? What are you going to settle for? I told you the story some time ago of the young soldier that came in just after World War I, wanted to settle for a sandwich and a place to sleep that night. I wouldn't let him do it. I talked him into settling for a higher rate than that, with the result that he became a multimillionaire within the following 4 years. I hope I'll have as much success with you in stepping your ambition up to where you're not willing to settle with life for a penny. Aim high. It's not going to cost you anything to aim high. You may not get as far as you aim, but you'll certainly get farther than you would if you don't aim at all. Get your sights raised up. Be ambitious. Be determined that you're going to become in the future what you have failed to become in the past. And number 8, ill health, often due to wrong thinking and improper diet. There's a lot of alibis on account of ill health, too, I can assure you. A lot of imaginary ailments. Well, they call it hypochondria in materia medica. I don't know to what extent you've been coddling yourselves or babying yourselves on with this, that, and the other imaginary ailment, but if you have been doing that, why, grade yourself down pretty low on that one. Number 9, unfavorable environmental influences during childhood. Now, once in a great while, you will find that the influences upon a person during childhood are of such a negative nature that they go all the way through life with those negative influences. I'm quite convinced that if I had been permitted to continue in my childhood as I started out, before my stepmother came into the picture, that I really and truly would have become a second Jesse James, only I would have been able to shoot faster and straighter than he did. Well, number 10, lack of persistence in following through with one's duties. There's a honey. Lack of persistence in following through with one's duty. What is it that causes people to fail to follow through when they start something? What's the main reason why people do not follow through and do the thing right and to see it's done right? Lack of motive. That's the idea. They don't want to do it badly enough. Believe you me, I'll follow through on anything that I want to follow through on, but if I don't want to follow through, I can find a lot of alibis to keep from doing it. Is it profitable for you to get into the habit of following through when you undertake something, or is it profitable for you to permit yourself to be sidetracked? Well, all right, let's put the question another way. How do you rate on that one? That's the important thing. How do you rate on that one? Do you follow through, or are you easily sidetracked? Are you easily dissuaded from doing a thing when somebody criticizes you? Believe you me, if I had been afraid of criticism, I never would have gotten anywhere in life. I got to the point eventually at which I really courted criticism because it only put the fight in me. And I found out that when that fight was in me, I did a much better job and I carried through better. There are a lot of people in this world who fail because they lack that driving force, don't you know, that causes them to carry through, and especially when the going is hard. No matter what you're doing, you're going to run into that period when the going is hard. If it's a new business, you'll probably need finances that you don't have in the beginning. Or if it's a profession, you'll need clients that you don't have in the beginning. Or if it's a new job, you'll need recognition with your employer that you don't have. You have to earn that recognition. The going is always hard with people in the beginning, and that's why you need this follow-through. Number 11, the habit of a negative mental attitude, the habit of keeping your mind negative all the time. Now, which are you? Preponderantly negative most of the time, or are you preponderantly positive? When you see a donut, what do you see first? Do you see the hole first, or the donut? Well, that's fine. You know, when you go to eat a donut, you don't eat the hole, do you? You just eat the donut. But there are a lot of people who, when they come across a problem, they are like the fellow who sees the hole in the donut and growls about it because it took so much of the nice cake out, but do not see the donut itself. Negative mental attitude. What is the result of a person who has the habit of allowing his mind to become negative and remain negative? What happens to that kind of a person? You can't put him in jail for it. You can't sue him for it. A negative mind repels, doesn't it? It repels people. A positive mind attracts. Attracts what? People who harmonize with your mental attitude, your character. That old saying of birds of a feather flock together? Well, negative birds flock to the negative mind, and positive birds flock to the positive mind. Who has control over your mind? Who determines whether it's positive or negative? Now then, there's where I want you to grade yourself, on the extent to which you exercise that prerogative. And that's the most precious thing that you have on the face of this earth or ever will have. It's the only thing that you have complete, unchallenged, and unchallengeable control over. Is the right to make your mind positive and keep it that way, or make it negative, allow the circumstances of life to make it negative. And you have to work at it if you're going to keep your mind positive, because for what reason? That's right. So much negative influences around you, so many people, so many circumstances that are negative, that if you're going to become a part of those, instead of creating your own circumstances in your mind, then most of the time you'll be negative. Do you have a very clear concept of what the difference is between a negative mind and a positive mind? Can you picture what happens in the chemistry of the brain when your mind is positive and when it's negative? Have you ever demonstrated or experienced in your own life the differences between your achievements when you are afraid and the achievements when you're not afraid? You have. Like in selling or like in doing anything else, in teaching or in lecturing or in writing or anything else. When I first wrote Think and Grow Rich, I wrote it while I was working for President Roosevelt during that bad depression during his first term. And I wrote it in that same negative mental attitude that everybody else was in. In other words, it was forced upon me unconsciously. Several years later, when I got that book out and read it, I recognized it was not a saleable book because of the tempo of it being negative. And you could pick that up. A reader will pick up exactly the mental attitude that a writer is in when he writes a book, no matter what kind of language or terminology he uses. So I sat down to my typewriter. I didn't change a word in that book. I sat down to my typewriter when I was in a new frame of mind, up on the beam, as we say, 100% positive, and I typed that book in that frame of mind, and that's the thing that made that book click. You can't afford to do anything when you're negative. Anything that you expect to benefit you. Anything that you expect to influence other people. If you want to get people to cooperate with you, or if you want to sell people something, or if you want to make a good impression upon people, don't come near them until you're in a positive frame of mind. Now, the reason I have emphasized that so much, I want to give you a chance to grade yourself accurately on that one. And in doing that, you will grade yourself on the average state of mind that you maintain, not just on the state of mind at any given time for a short time. I'll tell you a good rule to go by, which will enable you to determine to a large extent whether or not you are more positive than you are negative. Would you like to have that rule? Yes. Observe how you feel when you wake up in the morning and start to get out of bed. And if you're not in a good frame of mind, then I'll tell you right now, it's because of a lot of thought habits that have preceded that hour, the day before perhaps, that have been negative. You can make yourself very ill by allowing your mind to become negative, and it'll reflect itself the next morning in particular. You see, when you come out of sleep, you're just fresh from coming out from under the influence of your subconscious mind. Your conscious mind has been off duty, and it goes back on duty, and it finds a mess there that you've got to clean up, that the subconscious mind has been stirring up all night long. But if you wake up full of joy and you want to get out and get out what you're going to do today, well, the chances are that you've been pretty positive the day before, and maybe several days before. Number 12, lack of control over the emotions, both the negative and the positive. Have you ever thought that it's just as necessary to control your positive emotions as it is your negative ones? Why is that? Why in the world would I want to control the emotion of love, for instance?
Get you in hot water.
Lady, it not only can get you in hot water, it can scald you. That was a good one. That was a very good one. And that was a very spontaneous reply you gave, too. You must have had some experience. Well, Well, now let's take another emotion. Desire for financial gain, for money, for instance. Do you need to control that? Why? You're not afraid of getting too much, are you? Yes, getting it the wrong way. Now you said it. Well, there could be such a thing as you're working that emotion up to where you want to get too much. I met a lot of people who had too much money for their own good, especially people who got it without earning it, like people who inherited it, for instance. Would you be interested in knowing why they call me Napoleon? Would you be interested in knowing? Well, I'm going to tell you because it makes a good point here. My father named me, I being the eldest son, or the first child, my father named me after my great uncle, Napoleon Hill of Memphis, Tennessee, who was a multimillionaire cotton broker, hoping that when Uncle Napoleon died that I would get some of the money. Well, he died, and I didn't get any of the money. And when I found out that I was not going to get any of it, I felt very badly. But later on, as I swapped some of my youth for wisdom and observed what happened to the ones who did get it, I was thankful, eternally grateful that I didn't get a dime of it, because I learned a better way of getting it for myself without having it given to me. Well, number 13, the desire for something for nothing. Are you ever troubled with that? The desire for something for nothing, or the desire for something for less than its value, the desire for something without being willing to give adequate compensation for it. Are you ever troubled with that tendency? Well, now, who of us hasn't been at one time or another, I'd like to ask. But after all, you can have a lot of faults, but what you want to do is to find out what they are and start getting rid of them. That's why we're making this analysis. We're giving you a chance to come face to face and to be trial judge, be defendant, and be prosecutor all at one time, and then you make the decision finally. And if you make it accurately, it'd be far better for you to find your faults than it would be for me to find them for you. Because if you find them, you're not going to spin any alibis, you're going to try to get rid of them. And number 14, lack of the habit of reaching decisions promptly and firmly. Now, do you reach decisions promptly and firmly? Or do you reach decisions very slowly, and after you reach them, do you allow the first person that comes along to reverse you? Or do you allow circumstances to reverse your decision without a sound reason? To what extent do you stand by your decisions after you make them? Just under what circumstances would you reverse the decision that you had made incidentally? That's right, and you should hold an open mind on that subject at all times. You should never make a decision and say, that's it, and I'm going to stand by it forever, because there might be something developed later on that would prompt you to reverse that decision. And you know, there are some people who are known as stubborn, who, when once they've made a decision, right or wrong, they die by it. I've seen people like that, a lot of them, who would just rather die than to reverse themselves or have somebody reverse them on a decision. Of course, you're not like that. That is, if you're really indoctrinated with this philosophy, you may have been like that once, but you're not like that now, or you're not going to be like that after tonight. Number 15, one or more of the 7 basic fears. And I'm not going to dwell on them because there are the 7 basic fears, and you can grade yourself on that one at your leisure. You know, this is a wonderful world we're living in, a wonderful life. I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm doing just what I am. And if unpleasant circumstances cross my path, I'm very glad for that too, because I'll find out whether I'm stronger than the circumstances or not. And as long as I can conquer them and go over them, I'm not going to worry about circumstances, about things that oppose me, people that don't like me, people that say mean things about me. I don't worry about that. What I would worry about would be if people said mean things about me and I'd examine myself and found out they were telling the truth. But as long as they're not telling the truth, why, I can stand back and laugh at them, how foolish they are and how much damage they're doing themselves. Now, here's a honey, number 16, the wrong selection of a mate in marriage. Now, Don't be too quick to grade yourself on that one. If you've made a 100% mistake on that, look around before you grade yourself and see if you can't do something about correcting that mistake. Maybe resell yourself. I've known of that being done too, haven't you? Now, you know there's some people who believe that all marriages are made in heaven. Well, it would be a wonderful thing if they were, but I have seen some that were not made in heaven. I don't know where else they might have been made, but they certainly weren't made in heaven. Also, I've seen some business marriages, some business relationships that were not made in heaven. I've helped to correct a lot of those, believe you me. Business associates that were not working together in a spirit of harmony. And there's no business on the face of this earth that can succeed unless the people at the top level at least are working in harmony. And there's no household or home that can be a joy, a place that you want to go to worse than you want to come away from it, unless there is harmony at the top. That harmony starts with loyalty. Loyalty and dependability. And then would come ability after that. That's the way I would evaluate people. If I wanted to select a man or woman for a high position, the first thing I would look for is to see whether that person was loyal to the people to whom he owed loyalty. If he didn't have loyalty, I wouldn't want him or her on any terms whatsoever. The next thing I would look for would be dependability. Whether or not you can depend upon him to be at the right place at the right time and to do the right thing. And then after that would come ability. I've seen a lot of people who had great ability, but they were not dependable, and they were not loyal, and therefore very dangerous. Number 17, overcaution in business and professional relationships. Have you seen people so cautious that they wouldn't trust their own mother-in-law? Sure you have. I knew a man who was so cautious once that he had a special wallet made and a little lock put on it, and he hid the key in a different place every night so that his wife couldn't go through his trousers and take money out of his wallet. Wasn't he a honey? I bet his wife loved him. Overcaution in business and professional relationships. Then lack of all forms of caution in all human relationships. Have you seen people like that just didn't have any caution? People who start their mouths to going and go off and leave them. Never mind what they're going to say or what the effect's going to have on other people. You've seen people like that, haven't you? No caution whatsoever. No discrimination. No diplomacy. No consideration of what they're going to do to other people through their words. I've seen people with tongues that were sharper than a double-edged Gillette blade that never had been used. And they start them to cutting and just walk away and leave them. No caution whatsoever. I've seen people who would sign anything that a salesman put in front of them without even reading it. They wouldn't need to read the big type, let alone the little type. Have you seen people like that? Of course, you're not like that. But you know you can be overcautious and you can be undercautious. What is the happy medium? The happy medium is found in the lesson on accurate thinking, where you examine carefully the things that you're going to do before you do them, not afterward. Where you evaluate your words before you express them, not afterward. Now, you know it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to grade yourselves accurately on this one. I know it is. To be perfectly candid with you, it would be a little bit difficult for me to grade myself accurately on those two, on 17 and 18. Because there have been a lot of times in my life when I wasn't cautious at all. I think most of my troubles in my early days came through my trusting too many people. I let somebody come along and flatter me into using the name Napoleon Hill, and he'd go out and flim-flam a lot of people in the name of Napoleon Hill. That's happened several times in my life before I tightened up and became cautious. And that can happen to a lot of people, you know. But on the other hand, I wouldn't want to become so cautious that I didn't trust anybody for anything. You get no joy out of living if you did that. Number 21, lack of concentration of effort. That is divided interest. You split your interest. Divide them over your interest over a lot of different things. You know, one person is not strong enough and life is too short to ensure your success unless you learn the art of concentrating everything you've got on one thing at a time and following through on that one thing and doing a good job. And now here's one that's going to be difficult for you to grade yourself on, perhaps. Number 22, lack of a budget control over income and expenditures. Having a systematic way of taking care of your income and your expenditures. Do you know how the average person manages that question of a budget? Well, over his expenditures, that is somewhat controlled by the amount of credit that he can get from other people. That's about the only thing. When the credit shuts down on him, then he more or less slacks off. But until that happens, he runs wild with spending. A good business firm would go bankrupt in a little while if it didn't have a system of control over its income and its expenditures. That's what a controller in an organization is for. They call him a wet blanket usually. Every successful business of any size has to have a wet blanket. A man who controls the assets of the company, keeps them from getting away at the wrong time in the wrong way. And number 24, that's right, you're following. 23 is right. The failure to budget and use time to best advantage. Now, there is the most precious thing that you have. You have 24 hours every day. 8 hours of that you must devote to sleep if you're going to have health, or an average of that much, sometimes a little more and sometimes a little less, but on the average, 8 hours are taken right out. Then another 8 hours to make a living. And then you have another 8 hours of free time. In other words, in America here, as free citizens, you can do anything in the world that you want to with that other 8 hours. You can sin, you can spend, you can establish good habits, you can establish bad habits, you can re-educate yourself in your mind during those 8 hours. But actually, what are you doing with those 8 hours? Now, there's going to be the determining factor as to how you grade yourself on this particular question. How you're budgeting of the use of your time to the best advantage. Do you have a system of actually making all of your time count? Of course, you have the first 16 hours, they're practically taken care of automatically, but the other 8 hours is not taken care of automatically. That's something that you can do pretty much as you want to with. It's flexible. Number 24, lack of controlled enthusiasm. Now, there's a honey, too. Enthusiasm is among the most valuable of the emotions, beyond any question of doubt, provided that you can turn it on and off just like you would water at a spigot or an electric light. Now, if you can turn your enthusiasm on when you want to and then turn it off whenever you want to, then you can grade yourself 100% on that. But lack of the ability to do that would grade you somewhere down the other way, down toward that little zero. Now, how do you go about controlling your enthusiasm? Had you ever thought about your willpower? What it was placed there for? You have a power of will. And what's the purpose of that power of will? It's for the discipline. That power of will is for discipline over your mind. So you can make your mind whatever you want it to be. You can form habits, whatever kind of habits you want. I have never been able to find out or to determine in my own mind which is the worst. No enthusiasm at all, a cold fish, or red-hot enthusiasm out of control. They're both bad. Now, if somebody made me mad right now, I could turn off my enthusiasm just like that and turn on something else that would be much more appropriate maybe, provided I didn't use the wrong language. But there has been a time when I could turn on anger much more quickly than I could turn on enthusiasm, and I couldn't turn it off near as easily. That's something you'll have to overcome, too. The ability to turn on any of your emotions or to turn them off. Number 25, intolerance. That is, a closed mind based on ignorance or prejudice in connection with religious, racial, political, and economic ideas. Now, there you are. How do you rate on that one? Be a marvelous thing if you could rate 100% on that and say that you have an open mind on all subjects toward all people at all times. But if you could say that, you'd probably not be human, you'd be a saint. However, there are times, I suppose, when if you made up your mind to be open-minded on all these things, you could for a little while. I know I can for a little while. However, suppose you can't grade 100% on that one. Suppose that you can't be open-minded toward all people at all times on all subjects. What is the next best thing to do? Oh, of course, be tolerant some of the time. Now that's a good one. That's all right. And if you try that out, the more you try it out, the more that sometime will take on more and more time. And eventually you'll get to where tolerance will be a habit with you instead of intolerance. You know, there are people in this world, and I regret to say that they're in the vast majority, who, when they meet others, immediately begin to look for the things that they don't like in the other people, and they always find things they don't like. Then there's another type of person, and I notice that this other type of person is always much more successful, much more happy, much more welcome when he comes around, who, when he meets a person, whether it's an acquaintance or a stranger, immediately begins not only to look for the things that he likes in that person, but to compliment them, say something about them, or to do something about them, or to indicate that he recognizes good qualities instead of bad ones. I get a great thrill when somebody walks up to me and says, "Napoleon, aren't you Napoleon Hill?" I says, "Yes, I'm Gilly." "Well, I want to tell you, Mr. Hill, how much good I got out of your book." "Well, I just thrive on that. I love it. Does me a lot of good. Unless, of course, they rub it on too thick. And you can do that too, you know. But I've never seen the person yet that wouldn't respond in kind if you complimented that person. Even a pussycat, as bad-natured as they are, if you stroke him on the back, will curl up his tail and begin to purr. Cats are not very friendly, but you can make them friendly if you do the things the cat likes. 26, failure to cooperate with others in the spirit of harmony. Well, there are circumstances in life, I suppose, where your failure to cooperate would be justified. Or are there? I can say there are a lot of circumstances where you'd fail to cooperate. I come into contact with people very often who want me to do things that I can't possibly do for them. They want my influence. They want me to write letters of recommendation. They want me to make telephone calls for them. Well, I can't do it. I can't cooperate unless I'm sold on what I'm cooperating with and with whom I'm cooperating. And you'd be like that too. Number 27, possession of power or wealth not based on merit or earned. Well, I hope you won't have any trouble grading yourself on that one. And number 28, lack of the spirit of loyalty to those to whom it is due. Now, if you have loyalty in your heart to those to whom loyalty is due, you can grade 100% in that, perhaps. But unless you practice that all the time, you wouldn't grade 100%. You'd grade something lower than that. And incidentally, where you grade yourself anywhere on any of these lower than 50%, put a cross mark there and go back for study of that particular point. If you grade less than 50%, you should have all of these causes of failure at least 50% under control. And if it falls below that, you've reached the danger point. Number 29, the habit of forming opinions not based upon known facts. Now, to the extent to which you do that, give yourself a good grading on that one. And if you grade below 50% on that, begin to work on yourself right away and stop having opinions unless you base them on facts or what you believe to be facts. When I hear anybody expressing an opinion on something that I have reason to believe he knows nothing about, I always think of that story they tell on two men who were discussing Einstein's theory of relativity. And they got into a hot argument about it, and one of them said, "Oh, hell, what does Einstein know about politics anyway in the first place?" Oh, he understood relativity, didn't he? Well, there are people like that, you know, who have opinions about everything in the world. They can run the country better than Eisenhower's running it. They can tell J. Edgar Hoover a few things about his job, and they could always work their friends over and improve them. But if you examine them very carefully, they're not doing too well themselves generally. Number 30, egotism and vanity not under control. Egotism is a wonderful thing, and vanity is a wonderful thing. If you didn't have a little vanity, why, you wouldn't wash your neck or your face or have your hair curled or marcelled or whatever it is the women do to their hair. You have to have a little vanity, a little pride. But you can't have too much, can't you? Egotism and vanity. The ego, the human ego, is a marvelous thing. There are a lot of people who need a build-up of their ego. They have allowed the circumstances of life to whip them down until they've got no fight left in them. No initiative. No imagination. No faith. Your ego, your human ego, that's a wonderful thing if you have it under control and don't allow it to become objectionable to other people. I have never seen a successful person yet that didn't have great confidence in his ability to do anything he started out to do. And one of the purposes of this philosophy that you're studying is to enable you to build your ego up to where it will do for you anything you want it to do, no matter what it is. Now, there are some people whose ego needs to be trimmed down a little bit, but I'd say there are very many more that need a build-up than there are who need a squishing. Very many more. Number 31, lack of vision and imagination. I have never been able to determine exactly whether this great capacity for vision and imagination is an inherited quality or an acquired quality. I think perhaps in my case it was inherited because I have had a lot of imagination right back to the earliest days that I can remember. And that was one of the things that got me in difficulty in the early days. I had too much imagination and didn't direct it in the right direction. Well, let's see now, what's the next one? That's right, 33, desire for revenge for real or imaginary grievances. Which is the worst, to have or desire revenge for a real grievance, an injury somebody's done for you, or an imaginary grievance? Well, I wonder now. Think that one over. Why shouldn't you have... What happens to you when you have an expression of revenge, or desire for revenge, for any reason whatsoever? What happens to you? Does it hurt the fellow? Oh, that's it. That's the point. It hurts yourself. How does it hurt yourself? It makes you negative. That's the idea exactly. Poisons your mind. It even poisons your blood if you maintain it long enough. Any kind of a mental attitude will get into your blood and interfere with your sound health. Number 34, the habit of producing alibis instead of satisfactory results. To what extent do you immediately begin to look for an alibi when you make a mistake, or when you do something that doesn't turn out right, or when you neglect to do the thing that you should have done? To what extent do you come across and say, well, it was my fault, I lay it on the line, face the music, or do you begin to conjure up a set of alibis to justify what you've done or neglected to do? Now, that's the point on which you're grading yourself. What is the preponderance of your habits on that subject? And I'll say that if you are an average person, then the chances are that in the majority of cases, you look for an alibi to justify what you do or what you refrain from doing or neglect doing, if you're an average person. If you're not an average person, I'm sure you'll not be if you become properly indoctrinated to this philosophy, you will not look for alibis because you know that's only weakening. That's a crutch that you're leaning on. You'll face the music. You'll acknowledge your mistakes. You'll acknowledge your weaknesses. You'll acknowledge your errors, because self-confession is a marvelous thing. It does something to the soul. When you really know what your faults are and confess them honestly, you don't have to spread them to the whole world, but confess them where confession is necessary. I had a student of mine come into my office about a few days ago and make a confession that's going to be of more use to her than anything that's happened since she was a very small girl. Now, this student was suffering because she had not yet learned how to distinguish the difference between her needs for things and her rights to have them. Had you ever thought about that? She needed things very badly, and she was willing to get them the wrong way. But there are a lot of people make that mistake. They cannot tell the difference between the things they need and the things that they have a right to get. Number 35, lack of dependability. That perhaps will be a little bit hard for you to grade yourselves on. But generally speaking, you know whether you're dependable or not. You know whether your word's dependable. You know whether your performance in your occupation or your job is dependable. You know whether your relationship to your family, your wife, or your husband, or your children, you know whether you're a dependable family man or woman. You know that. You know whether you're dependable or not in connection with your credit relations with people where you buy things on credit. You know that. Is it a wonderful thing to have dependability among your friends? You just know exactly where they are, where they're always going to be regardless of what happens. Isn't it a wonderful thing to have dependability among your loved ones? Where you know they're not going to let you down on any score, at any time, for any reason. How many of you have a half a dozen people like that in your life? Absolutely dependable under all circumstances. My, what a lucky group of people this is. I'd say that if you have 3 people like that in an entire lifetime, you're indeed fortunate. People that are dependable under all circumstances. I'm not so sure, but what I can count the ones that I have that are like that on the fingers of my 2 hands, as many people as I know all over the world. Dependability, what a marvelous thing it is. Number 36, unwillingness to assume responsibilities commensurate with one's desire for compensation. In other words, your desire for the good things of life, good income and all that, nice home, nice car, nice wardrobe of clothes, but unwilling to assume the responsibilities to entitle you to those things. Now, how do you agree on that? In other words, are you willing to assume the necessary responsibilities to entitle you to all the things in life that you want to get out of life? That's the point that you're grading yourself on. And number 7, the failure to obey the conscience when it seems advantageous not to do so. Are there times when you tell your conscience just to step aside for a few moments while you don't look right now because there's a little bit of transaction or business here you want to attend to that's a little bit off color? Do you ever do that? Oh, I'm not going to ask you to vote on it. I wouldn't do that. Well, I think you could do that a few times and get away with it, but I think if you got in the habit of it, you would convert your conscience into a conspirator that would endorse all of the mean things you might ever want to do. And that would be bad. That conscience was given to you by an all-wise Creator so that you would always know what is right and what is wrong without having to ask anybody. And if you're on to good terms with your own conscience, if you really respond to that conscience under every circumstance and let it be your God, then you are a very fortunate person and you have been using that conscience properly. But if there are times when you waver, you're undecided, and you make your conscience step aside, then you need to grade yourself low and to begin to work on yourself on that score. I think it's a marvelous thing that the Creator should have given each individual a judge advocate, so to speak, to sit over all of his acts, all of his deeds, and all of his thoughts, and tell him when he's right and when he's wrong. Number 38, the habit of unnecessary worrying over things one cannot control. Now, how are you going to grade on that? Unnecessary worrying over things you can't control. If you can't control the thing that you're worrying over, what can you do about it?
Make the most of it.
Why, you can adjust yourself to that thing that you can't control in a positive mental attitude so as to not let it get you down. Or you can transmute that worry over into something on another subject where you can control it. And then number 39, neglect to recognize the difference between failure and temporary defeat. Have you ever thought about that? When is failure a failure, anyhow? That's right. When you accept it as such, no matter what the conditions are, if you accept it as failure, that's it. Is failure ever a failure until you accept it as such? No, of course not. It's temporary defeat, perhaps, but certainly not failure. You know, if you took no for an answer, if you were selling, and you took no for an answer every time you heard it, you'd never make a living selling. Because it's easier for people to say no than it is to say yes, and they don't mean it at all. They just mean that they haven't yet been broken down by a good salesman. Temporary defeat and failure. Who determines whether a circumstance in your life is a temporary defeat or failure? Who determines that? That's right. You're the one who determines that. And 40, lack of flexibility in adjusting to the varying circumstances of life. Lack of a flexibility of your mind. Do you know it's necessary at times for you to go along with unsavory bedfellows, people that you don't like. You go along with them until such time as they drop out of your life. Of course, you could have it out with them right where you stand. But if you do that, you probably would oftentimes get the worst of it. You can wear them out, walk them to death, by going along with them for a time. If you make an incident out of everything that you dislike in people, if you make an incident out of it, well, you'll always be in difficulty. If you let these things that are food for incidents pass by, time is a wonderful cure, a wonderful agent. You know, it's the greatest doctor on the face of the earth, of everything. Time, old Mother Time. Or is it Father Time? Well, anyhow, maybe it's both. There are a lot of things in this world that can be cured only with time. Now, there are people who fret themselves to death and wear themselves out making incidents out of very silly, small, unimportant things every day of their lives. And there's not a day ever goes by in the life of any of you that you couldn't make an incident out of something and have an unpleasant scene with somebody if you would allow yourself to do it. But of course, being a student of this philosophy, you're going to grade yourself about, let's say, about 80% on that one. Flexibility. That is, the ability to adjust yourself to these circumstances that you don't like without going down under them and without making an incident out of them. And you may have a very peculiar cause of failure that I haven't mentioned here at all. It'd be most interesting to see what it is if you do have one, because I have given you a pretty good catalog here of the things that cause people to fail. And one of the interesting things about this list of 40 things that cause people to fail, what is the most interesting thing about that list?
We have control.
They represent things that you can do something about. Now, isn't that true? What would be the use of my having you make this analysis if you couldn't do anything about it? You can eliminate every one of those causes of every one of them. And you can almost do it instantaneously. There are a few of them. It'll take a little time for you to develop up more positive habits, but for the most part, every one of these causes of failure you can wipe out of your character this very night.